that's all minced, so we're going to slide that over to the side as well. I'm going to give you a tomato. I'm going to take a tomato. And once again, the best way to slice anything round is to try to get a flat surface. So this actually, the top of the tomato, usually is the flattest part of the tomato. So what I like to do is take my knife. You gotta have a super sharp knife if you're gonna cut a tomato, and just kind of cut that little bit off.
Okay.
And that way, see my tomato, it's not moving around, it's not rolling around, and it's a lot safer to cut that way.
The wetness helps hold it to the cutting board.
Exactly. It creates a little moisture, a little glue, it sticks to the wood, it's perfect, it's not going to go anywhere, and we're ready to slice. So for this, we're going to make like a small dice for the soup. So we don't want big chunks, we want smaller chunks. So basically, we're going to do kind of the same way. We're going to make nice slices, thin slices first. So the first thing you want to do is see how I take my hands and I curl my fingers under. So when I come up here on my knife, see the blade of the knife actually touches between the two knuckles of your finger.
Okay. So
my fingertips are nowhere near the bottom of the blade of the knife.
Curled back.
They're curled under, so there's no risk for you to chop your fingertips off. So that's really the key, is to keep those fingertips curled under. A lot of people try to say, they say like the best way to think about it is if you're holding an egg under your hand.
Yeah, that makes
so
sense.
If you were holding it
straight, and then you push down.
Yeah. If I was holding an egg, that's how I would hold it, right? So that's kind of what you want to think about when you're doing it, holding that egg right under your hand. So go ahead and make a slice. There you go. And basically what you're doing is you're using that finger to guide the knife across.
Am I trying to keep the tomato together while it's in its slices at this point?
Yeah, I mean it doesn't matter. We're going to go back and we're going to see the end can get a little tricky here. So we're going to go back and we're going to cut it again a different way. So we're actually going to go back and split it in half. I like to split it kind of in half because tomatoes are tricky, and if you don't have a really sharp knife, you're going to end up cutting yourself. And especially that skin can be really thick. That's why they make things, serrated knives that are called tomato knives sometimes, because it can be really hard to cut through the flesh of a tomato. So right now we're going to...
you just took off the top and the bottom brown part. Are you removing that?
I'm going to remove that for right now because once again, these are the non-flat parts of the tomato. So when you're stacking something like this, if there's a round piece on it, it's going to make it a little more difficult. So I kind of like to take the round pieces off and cut them separately. So we're going to take the stacks. You can take a few at a time, and see how we have that nice flat part. So when you want something to be square like a dice, you want to try to get it as flat and straight as possible to the edges. So we're just going to come back, saw through that, nice thin. Fell apart, of course. And then we're going to turn it, rotate it one more time, come straight down, and there you go. We get a nice dice. We can put that aside. We'll do the same thing with the other pieces.
So gotta get in the habit of holding my fingers properly.
Yep, it takes a little time, but once you do, you'll see it makes such a difference, and I didn't even talk about the other hand, which I probably should have. Talk about just holding the knife properly. You know, a lot of people, I notice, try to cut with their fingertip on top of the blade. And actually, when you cut with the fingertip on top of the blade, you get a lot less control. So you really want to keep that right finger, that ring finger,
wrapped around.
That first finger, I'm sorry, your index finger, wrapped around the front of the handle. So basically, it's like if I were to come and shake your hand, that's how you want to hold a knife. Just like that. So you take your hand out, that's where the knife goes, right in there.
Got it.
So that's kind of the angle also, you know, and you don't want your arm to be out super wide, so it should feel really natural when you're looking at a cutting board. It should be really natural. You shouldn't be standing sideways or on your head or upside down unless you're doing yoga, you know, things like that. Not when you're cutting. Not when you're cutting, right? So we can go back and we can put that aside. We've got enough tomatoes for now.
Good. Moving on.
And that's it. Yeah. So we're gonna move along. We're gonna go ahead and put this in a bowl and get that ready because we have one more thing that we want to cut up, and that is the lemongrass.
Okay, that I definitely want to learn how to do properly.
So lemongrass, super easy.
This is a really cool tip. I've got my cutting board here, and Val wet a paper towel and put it underneath to keep it from slipping on me. So that's pretty cool.
It's a little restaurant secret that we do. Otherwise, your board will be all over the place, and you're going to chop your fingers off in a matter of seconds. So non-sticking. So lemongrass. Super easy. What we like to do is pull that outside layer off, especially sometimes the outside can be brown and sort of, you know, because it's been handled and managed. So sometimes you have to pull 2 layers off, but this actually looks really nice. See, there's no dents, there's no brown on it. And basically there's a couple things we can do. What we like to do is actually take the spine of your knife, the back of your knife first, and just give it like a little...
Kind of bruise it up?
Bruise it up. And basically that just releases some of the juices inside. It's like if you take a lemon and you roll a lemon, right? It's the same effect. You're releasing the juice. So then I like to cut the end off. And depending on what we're using it for, I can cut both ends off. Depending on what we're using it for, you can cut it in big chunks, small chunks. If it's something that you're going to strain, I suggest you cut it in smaller chunks. But we're not going to actually strain this soup today because we want all the stuff in the soup, all the flavor of it. So we're going to cut this in kind of in bigger chunks so that we can just sort of pull it out at the end.
Looks like 2-inch, 2.5-inch lengths.
Yeah, just about that. Perfect. And that's it. That's all you do. Super, super easy.
Love it.
So we're ready to actually start the cooking process. We also, oh no, we're not. I lied. Sorry, got you all excited for a second there. So we're going to use some mushrooms. So we're somewhat ready. But last but not least, yes, we've got some really nice trumpet mushrooms. Actually, we have, you can use a variety of mushrooms, wild mushrooms. You can use any kind of mushrooms you want for the soup. Button mushrooms if you really want. Just make sure you wash the button mushrooms. A little bit of water, not too much water. If you do wash them in water, you want to dry them out a little bit because once you put mushrooms into a saute pan, it's just going to release all that water because they're sponges, so they're going to absorb all that. But these are wild mushrooms and they're already clean, so all we really have to do is actually cut them. But if you're using mushrooms like this, you'll see that they come together in a clump, and the bottom is obviously where they grow, and that's where the dirt would be. So instead of we can either just pick them apart, or we can take our knife and just kind of cut that little bottom piece off, which we don't need because it actually is kind of hard and crunchy anyways. So you can cut that little bottom piece off, and then we're just going to pull the mushrooms apart because these are really tasty, and so you want to eat them, and they look really pretty, so you kind of want to eat them whole.
Really pretty. They're so white.
They're super pretty, super tasty. So we can just actually pick these apart just like that. Now these bigger guys, we'll cut them up. So go ahead and take one of these big guys, cut it in half first, right? Once again, it's always easier. Cut the end off, cut them in half first. It's always easier to cut something right when it's nice and flat, so put the flat side down. And we can cut it any way we want. We can cut it in chunks like this, and that works, or we can cut it, I'll show you this way, we can just kind of cut it in half, we can cut it lengthwise. Really doesn't matter, it's entirely up to you, feel free to get fun and creative with that. And that's pretty much it. So these are all of our ingredients, all of our veggies that are going to go in here, and now we're going to start the cooking process.
For real this time.
For real, I'm not kidding this time. So we got our big stock pot nice and hot, so I've got that working on the stove, a little bit of warm. Just let it sit for a few minutes until you can feel the heat.
What temperature do you have it on? We're using a gas range, so...
Yeah, I've got it on like a low heat, low to medium heat. So, or you can throw it on there, crank it up to high for about a minute if you really want to.
And turn it back.
And then turn it down. So the thing is that once you add your oil though, you don't want it to burn, and you don't want your veggies to burn, so you don't want it to be super, super hot. Unless you're searing something else that we want like nice color on. So we want it just nice and warm so that once we add the oil, it's going to melt pretty much instantly. So I'm going to go ahead and add that oil right now.
It's a coconut oil that we're using, which also has a really high smoke point, so it's going to hold up to that heat really well.
Yeah, exactly. That's the game plan. So we've got about a tablespoon or so in there. When you start sauteing mushrooms, they actually absorb a lot of, just like they would water, they absorb a lot of the oil as well. So sometimes you find that you throw it in there and you start cooking and you realize that there's no oil in the bottom of the pan. So you might actually have to add a little bit more, but we'll gauge that as we go along. So right now we let the oil sit. You can kind of hear it sizzling a little bit. That's a good sign. That's how we know that it's done. So I'm going to take all my veg here, throw it in there, and that is like music to a chef's ears, right? So you can throw the lemongrass in there as well. So if you throw your veg in and there's no sizzle, then your pan was not hot enough. So we'll give it a nice little stir, and I'm going to make sure that the stove temperature is at about a medium. So don't want it too high, otherwise everything is going to burn. So, and we want to make sure that we watch this, right? We're going to watch it. So we've got garlic, ginger, shallots, and lemongrass in there, sweating away. That's the technical term. to sweat your vegetables, meaning we're just going to cook it long enough to release the flavor, but not long enough to get any color on it. So we don't want any brown, we don't want any caramelization, certainly don't want any burning, obviously. Burning is rarely a good thing. And then we're going to let it cook. This whole process, since the veggies are cut so small, should really only take about a minute, minute and a half. It's just about there. You can actually kind of see that the vegetables, when you do it yourself, you can see that they actually become translucent. We're going to start by adding some of our mushrooms. And give it a nice stir. And once again, mushrooms take a little bit longer to cook, and they're definitely going to absorb a lot of that oil. So I give it a coat and make sure that as you look at it, everything has like a slight glaze to it. So that's how you can
So
tell.
how long are we cooking these vegetables?
Cook these just another couple minutes, because don't forget, once we add the liquid, the coconut milk and water, the curry, it's going to sit and it's going to cook for about 30 minutes in the pot. So it's
sauteing 5 minutes probably?
Total. I would say between the garlic, the onions, the garlic, the shallots, and the ginger and the lemongrass and the mushrooms, probably about a 4 to 5 minute total. Because now we're going to add